that rig, but the rig I prefer when I'm bottom fishing is a Carolina rig. If there's not a lot of current, I want to use as little weight as possible, which is at least 3 ounces usually, 2 or 3 ounces. And we showed this knot a little while ago. Again, I've got my 65-pound braid on my big Therese extra heavy with an 18,000 Saragossa. And I've got my crank-on leader that will crank right on into the guides. And that crank-on leader is about 10 feet long. So that sucker will crank right on into the guides, and it casts through the guides really well. And then I've got a glass bead on each side of a fish finder rig. Now, I typically just like to use an egg sinker, a big egg sinker, but with that fish finder rig, if you're in it, if you're anchored up and fishing around the inlets, which is where most people are doing the anchored up cobia fishing, if you're around the inlets, you're going to have a lot of current. And this fish finder rig will enable you to snap on 8 or 10 or 12 ounce weight, whatever is warranted. You know, you'll cast it out, and there's going to be a little bit of drift to it. I'll fish a couple lines off each side of the boat, and I might have to keep casting those upstream if the current's really bad. Then I'm going to fish one on the back of the boat with just a regular egg sinker, same rig, but just instead of the fish finder rig, I got a regular egg sinker, and that's swimming that bait right behind the boat. And you know, you see people with floats, and I'm sure a lot of people catch cobias on floats, you know, floating rigs, bobbers, balloons, whatever. I never had any success with it. All my stuff's been on the bottom. But the other thing you gotta have rigged up is you gotta have that bucktail. Because again, when you hook a fish, a lot of times the first thing he's gonna do is come up to the surface, and you're gonna see 2 or 3 more with them. And the only thing better than having 1 fish hooked up is having 2 fish hooked up. As far as bait for the bottom fishing, whatever's fresh is best. But menhaden by far is the best for fishing on the bottom. But when you stop in Neuse Sport Shop, get your bucktails, get your Therese rods and your Saragossas, get some eels too. Get a half a dozen eels. They're real easy to care for. You put them in a, y'all got eels, don't you?
Nobody has eels right now.
Nobody has eels. What are we gonna do? Hey, well, I'm gonna tell you, if you, by the time you see this, they're gonna have eels. I'm sure they're gonna. You tell me you're gonna have eels. You got, next week you'll have eels. Anyway, you get your eels, get you half a dozen eels, put them in one of those Walmart bags or Neuse Sport Shop bags, and tie a knot in the top of it. Don't need any water or anything. They're gonna be just fine. Tie a knot in the top of it, put it in the cooler. But not right on the ice, but in the cooler. Once they're in the cooler, then loosen that knot on the top of that bag, because if they get out of the bag, then it's okay, they're still in the cooler. If they get out the bag in your car or the bottom of the refrigerator, which is where I keep them a lot of times, your wife's gonna have something to say about it. So untie that knot a little bit, that way they can breathe some, and they'll survive for a couple days good enough, even if they're a little weak. A cobia eat them. But keep them on the ice, and that, or in the cooler where it's cool, and that way they're going to slow down a little bit. But the way to handle them is get paper towel, and grab hold of that slimy durker with a paper towel, and take your hook and hook him through the eyes or up through the nose. And as soon as he's on the hook, you got to start shaking the line and shake it and shake it. Otherwise, he's going to climb back up on it. Shake that line and get ready. And then you can put him in a bucket, and usually won't, as long as there's not a lot of tension on it, he won't get slime up and tie it into a knot. But a live eel, sight casting at a finicky cobia, if he doesn't go on that bucktail, he'll go on that live eel. And if he doesn't go on that, well, you ain't gonna catch him, but nobody else is either, so don't feel bad. Any of y'all have any specific questions before we move on about cobia fishing?
What about tides and all?
We go on fishing no matter what the tide is, but there are some places that different tides may be better. Right now, I think around the inlets, on the outside of the inlets, with this warm water coming out, there's going to be some real good tide lines where the water's actually almost 70 degrees inside the inlet. Typically, I like the water moving a little bit within a couple hours of the slack tide, and I've caught them on every tide, incoming, outgoing. There's a lot of fish moving in and out those inlets. And you know, any tide you're fishing, but again, the most important thing about anchored up and fishing is fresh bait and changing your bait often. If you see that rod bounce a time or two, that means a bluefish has come along and eaten half of your menhaden. So yeah, you got a half a bait on there, but wind it in, take that bait off and throw it in the water, put your fresh bait on. And that's chumming. And if you're diligent about changing your baits, you're going to get more and more bluefish. You're going to have to change your baits more and more often, and you're going to do more and more chumming. You're going to attract more stuff to you. You know, I don't use a chum bag. I don't use any. I don't chum real heavily at all. But what I do is I change my baits a lot, like almost continuously. Any other questions? Hey guys, we're going to stick around here a little bit longer. I want to show you some of these knots in detail that I talked about, and we may talk about some other things in a bit, but I wanted to thank you all very much for having me here tonight at New Sport Shop, and they got a super knowledgeable staff here. If anytime you got any questions, you're driving down Highway 70, pull in there and they'll get you rigged up. Thank you a bunch, guys. But I want to show this knot, and y'all want to see this? This is called a no-name knot. This is called a no-name knot. You've got a bimini twist, which is your strongest knot to make a double line, and this is a great way to connect a double line to a piece of crank-on leader. And what we do, we got the loop here. We go up with the mono and wrap it around just like you're going around a barber pole, 3, 4 times, and then fold it back, still wrapping the same direction. Just wrap back down to the loop 3 or 4 times, and then you take the tag in, you stick it back through the loop. Okay? So all we did is we went up, wrapped it around, folded it back, and went back through the loop. To tighten it up, the only thing you pull is the standing line. You don't pull the tag in. And the key to it is you got to get it really, really tight. You can snip the tag really flush, and it's a great crank-on leader for tarpon fishing or cobia fishing. Anything where you get the fish, 8 or 10, 15 feet from the boat, you want to put a little bit more pressure on it. It's still IGFA legal. You can grab hold of this crank-on leader and pull them a little bit closer to you where you can stick a gaff in them.